Hi there. Welcome to Pluto Press. My name is Patrick Hughes, and I'm the sales manager for North America. It's really great to have everyone here for the inaugural Fall-Winter 2023 preview. We're here today with 5 authors who are writing on incredibly vital subjects. These books embody the unique Pluto Press perspective that speaks often to marginalized and underrepresented communities around the world. I see this event as an opportunity to hear directly from our authors and gain insight to their scholarship. Before we get into the presentations, I'd like to introduce Verushka Selbach, Managing Director of Pluto Press, who will say a few words about our publishing program.
Hello and welcome. It's very exciting to be able to introduce Pluto Press to you all. We published our first book in 1969. Since then, Pluto has consistently been at the forefront of radical publishing, thought-provoking and groundbreaking works that challenge the status quo, inspire activism, and foster a deeper understanding of the complex issues facing the world today. Our books and authors are international. We believe that the fate of each of us is bound up in the fate of others. We have an unwavering commitment to social justice, and our mission is to publish books that make a tangible impact on society. We have a reputation for producing high quality, politically engaged literature that covers a wide range of subjects, from politics to sociology to economics, feminism, environmentalism, and more. We publish about 50 books a year. We're a small team of just 18 people, many of whom have been at Pluto for over 20 years. We have a backlist of 1,500 books. In 2021, we realized a very long-standing dream. We set up a US company, Pluto Press Inc. We're distributed by the University of Chicago Press. Our books are sold throughout the US and Canada by a phenomenal group of reps. We've grown 30% in North America in the last year, and we're very excited. Back to you, Patrick.
Well, thanks, Verushka. Our first author to speak is Rebecca Jane Morgan on her book, Gender Heretics, Evangelicals, Feminism, and the Alliance Against Trans Liberation. Rebecca is a trans feminist and evangelical Christian, a historian of modern Britain, popular culture, and queer identities. Her PhD research at the University of Nottingham explores the history of trans politics in the UK since the 1970s. Rebecca?
Thank you very much, Patrick. I'm Rebecca. I'm a trans person. I'm a feminist. I'm also an evangelical Christian, and I'm very aware that that's not a very common combination, even more so in North America, where evangelicalism and transphobia are basically the same thing, synonymous. Evangelical legislators are leading the way in the explosion of anti-trans bills that are seeking to ban trans-affirming medical care, to bar trans people from the bathrooms that they feel most comfortable using, and to eliminate any mention of trans people in K-12 education, all of which is aimed at making trans life less safe and less possible, which doesn't strike me as a very Christian thing to do. And in North America, no less than here in the UK, we've been witnessing this strategic and rhetorical alliance between the so-called Christian right and other anti-trans factions that present themselves as feminist. The US Women's Liberation Front, for example, has been working hand in hand with the Evangelical Heritage Foundation to promote anti-trans legislation and stir up fears of this woke attack on children. In 2020, Oklahoma State Senator James Lankford, an ordained minister in the Evangelical Southern Baptist Convention, even quoted the British anti-trans feminist and Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling in a speech opposing pro-LGBTQI+ legislation. And indeed, the Christian right's obsession with the question, what is a woman, dovetails very neatly with this anti-trans feminist belief that trans identity is a threat to women specifically. And so, in Gender Heretics, Evangelicals, Feminists, and the Alliance Against Trans Liberation, what I do is really just uncover the ideological origins of this unlikely alliance, And from my perspective as a practicing evangelical Christian, I argue that transphobia is not an inevitable part of evangelical thought, and that fighting for a better evangelicalism isn't a lost cause. So as I explore in the book, there have actually been plenty of trans-affirming evangelicals in positions of authority, leading back even to the 1960s, where several Southern Baptist ministers really didn't have a problem with it. The automatic association between transphobia and evangelicalism is a very recent phenomenon, strengthened and accelerated by this continuous sharing of notes with anti-trans feminists like Rowling. And so, you know, to break apart that alliance and build towards a future that's safer and more hospitable and more fulfilling for trans people everywhere, and to help evangelicals embody more clearly the man Jesus whose teachings we claim to follow, we need to understand the why and how of contemporary transphobic belief systems, and we need to know what we can do to change them. And that's what this book offers. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. You know, those of us in the United States see a continuum of what's going now, dating back to the early 1980s, where the radical feminist Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon were part of this group that wrote something called the Anti-Pornography Civil Rights Ordinance legislation that eventually ended up being used as this significant tool towards censorship by the far right. You know, how it feels like we're repeating ourselves here. I mean, how do these incongruities continue to exist after all these years?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the answer I would give is that we have to stop thinking about this as necessarily incongruities, and think about it instead as conjunctions between ideologies that genuinely do overlap in some respects. Particularly with, you know, the anti-pornography campaigns. One of the first anti-trans authors to really make a name for herself was Janice Raymond. She's an American author, and she's made a name for herself also in the anti-pornography scene, and anti-sex work scene. So, you know, this is a long-standing relationship, and modern conjunctions between anti-trans feminists and conservative evangelicals are very much a continuation of that thing that we've been seeing in American politics for quite a long time, but it's gone under-commented on, under-examined. And that's why I think it's really important that we grapple with this now, because this isn't going to be the last time that this happens.
No, of course not. And so we're really looking forward to the release of Gender Heretics. Our second author is Peter Howson, and his book, Let Them Eat Crypto, the blockchain scam that's ruining the world. Peter Howson is a technology writer, researcher, and assistant professor of international development at Northumbria University, Newcastle. He investigates the greenwashing, aid washing, and crypto shenanigans that go on in Silicon Valley, as well as the lesser-known tech hubs of the global South. Peter?
Thanks, Patrick. So this book started for me about 7 or 8 years ago. I first heard about blockchain and crypto.
Did you ask?
Sorry?
Well, go ahead.
Okay. So I first heard about blockchain and crypto when I was doing some research in a swamp forest in Indonesia. And there was this orangutan conservation outfit. They were raising cash from big corporations like Gazprom and Disney. But instead of these companies just giving money to conserve orangutans, they were being asked to invest their money in a cryptocurrency, which was then being pledged to indigenous forest communities as a reward for planting and protecting trees. And I was intrigued by all this to start with, but none of these indigenous people had smartphones or reliable internet or even an interest in crypto. And it soon became obvious that these poor people would be losing their land to this venture in return for some worthless cryptocurrency. And this sort of crypto fix, it wasn't a one-off. I started seeing this everywhere. Respectable companies and charities suggesting their new blockchain was the pinnacle of innovation. These dodgy fishing companies telling people that their cans of tuna were all slavery-free because they said as much on their blockchain. I watched Sam Altman's outfit. He's the ChatGPT guy. They were taking scans of poor kids' eyeballs in exchange for their made-up internet money. WorldCoin. You may have seen that in the news recently. So in Let Them Eat Crypto, I show how, just like Dogecoins and NFT socks, these blockchain for good projects are a scam. There are a couple of books coming out soon looking at the big fallen angels in crypto casino land, like Sam Bankman-Fried, who ran the multi-billion-dollar FTX fraud. Those books all tend to explain that there's a few bad apples that they're ruining it, what would otherwise be a giant leap in digital innovation. This book is different. I explain how blockchain is simply an illusion of innovation. It's informed by my academic research, which has all been published in academic science journals. But this book is very accessible. It's lighthearted. I've written this without any techno blather or crypto gobbledygook, so that anyone sympathetic to progressive causes, social justice issues, will be able to get their heads around this stuff and see crypto for what it is. So Let Them Eat Crypto makes the case for scrapping blockchain. I explain why quitting this stuff doesn't stifle innovation or technological progress. It stifles fraud, conflict, climate breakdown. Crypto can't bank the unbanked. It can't save the orangutans. It can't free people from greedy bankers or oppressive governments. Blockchain, quite simply, makes everything worse. So the book pulls apart all the greenwashing, the pinkwashing, the left-washing tactics that's been used by blockchain proponents, and it argues that we shouldn't hang on in hope that these blockchain experts can iron out all the kinks and deliver what they've been promising for so long now, but to no avail. All crypto projects are essentially capitalism on steroids, except nothing with any real utility is for sale. And this scam has huge costs for society and the environment.
Well, thanks, Peter. You know, some of the rhetoric that's used by the crypto hustlers, really kind of evokes occasionally some of the progressive language, but yet all of these crypto enthusiasts are like libertarian types. So what should radical thinkers and leftists read when they are looked for when they're reading this book?
Well, they should read this. So I have a chapter dedicated to answering this question. And the reason I thought this was important to include, I was getting a lot of messages from people reading my articles in the press saying crypto is a tool for activism, just as much for the left and progressives as it is for the far right. But the point I'm making in the book is that crypto is counterproductive to our political struggles. Crypto people often say, but wait, Julian Assange is on the front cover of Bitcoin magazine, Edward Snowden, Sci-Hub. They've all been advocating for crypto. Even nominally lefty celebrities like Russell Brand are crypto bros now. But in this book, I explain that crypto and blockchain, like any technical fix, it can't remove the need for political struggle. There's this myth that crypto is useful for poor and powerless people. But this is just like the myth of black capitalism, this idea that the poor can catch up with the rich simply by being savvier with their investments. This is nonsense, because the uber rich didn't get to where they are with hard work and smart investments. They got there through violence. Cryptocurrencies, blockchains, they reinforce colonial power relations and violence rather than contesting them. So in the same way that we can't stop wars with more mustard gas and machine guns, crypto is unregulated free market fundamentalism, and we can't contest capitalism with that.
Well, thank you, Peter. We really look forward to Let Them Eat Crypto. Our third speaker is Joshua O. Reno, who, along with Holly High, are the editors of As If Already Free, Anthropology and Activism After David Graeber. Unfortunately, Holly couldn't join us because she is in the field in Laos, I believe. So Josh will be speaking on her behalf. Josh Reno is the professor at Binghamton University, a sociocultural anthropologist. He is the author of Waste Away, Military Waste, and the co-author of Imagining the Heartline. He co-edited the collection of Economies of Recycling. Josh?
Thanks, Patrick. Holly and I decided to create this book basically when David Graeber died. We'd both known him, and like many people in and outside of anthropology, we'd been very inspired by his work over the years. But we neither of us had been very close with him in the years leading up to his rather sudden death for different reasons. And essentially, we got a group of friends together over Zoom to mourn collectively for the months after his passing, and that turned into this book sort of organically. So it's a very personal book for us. It's also the first and only of its kind, which is a book devoted to David Graeber's intellectual and activist legacy. Each chapter takes inspiration from his work to talk about various subjects, from education to disability and debt to banking and childbirth, sort of reflecting all the various topics he contributed to during his lifetime. We explore these topics in new and unexpected ways by finding examples from all over the world and throughout history, which is what his approach was. So we're very much mimicking or trying to carry on the torch, as it were. Our title, As If Already Free, comes from an anarchist slogan, which David greatly admired. So much so that he actually wanted to have that be the title of his first and only edited collection, which ended up being called Possibilities and was published with AK Press. But he didn't get his way because David was never as free as he tried to live. We talk about that, actually, Holly and I, in our in one long essay we write in the book, which where we try to do something that we hadn't seen done before. We run through literally all of his work. We read every one of his many books, every book published in his lifetime, and a few that have been published posthumously. That chapter kicks off the volume, but also provides a kind of introduction to his corpus for the uninitiated reader. That could be somebody who's heard his name, heard the name David Graeber, but doesn't know where to begin. Or maybe they picked up Pirate Enlightenment or bullshit jobs on someone's recommendation, and then they didn't see what all the fuss was about. So this book is for those people, is the way we see it. David was really prolific. He was occasionally popular, especially his book Debt made a big splash. And the more recent book that he wrote with David Wengrow as well. But his prose could be dense, and it could take really unexpected twists and turns. It could be hard to follow his arguments sometimes. Our chapter is sort of like the one that Robert Tucker famously provided for the start of the Marx and Engels reader. It's sort of like you're about to read a lot of dense, difficult stuff, how to make sense of it. So we try to provide context for David's writing and for his contribution to theory and activism. Because even though, despite him being a radical leftist, his writing itself could be sometimes pretty alienating, ironically. So despite his popularity, no one's really done this before. And given the task, it's sort of easy to see why, even though we did have a lot of fun reading through all his work. So that's the book. And we came away, having written it and editing it, with a real new appreciation for our friend and for his work. And for his contribution to how we write and how we think today, and the contribution it could make in the future. And we hope readers will too.
Well, thank you, Joshua. One of the things about David that I haven't learned until recently, that he actually grew up in a radical household. I believe his father may have fought in the Spanish Civil War. I believe that's rather unusual for somebody who's contemporary, say, in my generation. How do you think that affected his scholarship?
Well, fortunately, David wrote quite a bit about his own personal history. I mean, I think if you write as much as he did, eventually you start writing snippets of an autobiography. If you read across all your books, and he in fact did, we use that in our own book. But I mean, for him, the reason he kept bringing it up, he also brought up that his parents were working class garment workers, that they were organizers, that he learned a kind of radical leftism in his bones growing up in that household before he then found out there were people writing about it in libraries or in academic libraries or at bookstores. So, it drove him in that way. But I think it also was important for another reason, which was a big part of David's sort of his argument or his contribution in general to both activism and to theory, we argue, Holly and I, was the value of stories, all kinds of stories. And I think it's fair to say that for David, he thinks that within social science and within the humanities, stories oddly get sort of made secondary. When people theorize, they forget that we're telling stories that are meant to live on in some way through theory, but also that he thought that stories were incredibly important for activist projects and stories in all kinds. Like, David is credited with coining the term, we are the 99%, which is a slogan, but it's also kind of encapsulates a story about collective action and about who the people really are and about a set of goals through struggle. So really that bit of his childhood and all aspects of his biography became part of his own story, but also became part of his conviction in all of his writing that the way we tell stories about history, about humanity, about activism matter more than we realize.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you very much. We're very much looking forward to As If Already Free, and having a work about David Graeber as part of our list is really going to help us, really expand our presence in North America. Our fourth author is Robert Chapman, and their title, Empire of Normality, Neurodiversity and Capitalism. Robert Chapman is a neurodivergent philosopher writing on neurodiversity, theory, madness, and disability. They have taught at King's College London, the University of Bristol, and Sheffield Hallam. As of 2023, they are the world's first assistant professor on critical neurodiversity studies at Durham University. They blog at Psychology Today and at Critical Neurodiversity. Robert?
Thanks, Patrick. My book really began in failure. I got involved in neurodiversity activism over 10 years ago now. And this was partly activism and campaigning, but then blogging and working on theory, which led me to academia. And something we've been doing is working broadly within what I would call kind of liberal traditional political framework, where the focus is on kind of rights and recognition. The main neurodiversity movement tactic has been to change the framing from saying things like autism or ADHD or so on are just individual medical problems to be fixed at the individual level, and to say, no, we're minority groups and we need recognition and rights, just like any other minority group. And over the years, I've seen how powerful this is, and it has really helped. And this has been really effective. And yet also, I've become really more sensitive to the failures of this approach, the limitations of this approach. So just to give a few examples, right now, in both the US and the UK, around 50% of people incarcerated in prisons have dyslexia alone. Similarly, very high statistics with other neurodivergent disabilities. To give a different example, in Denmark, often called the happiest country in the world, people who are autistic are around 9 times more likely to experience suicidal thoughts than members of the general population in the happiest country in the world. And in all the most progressive countries, supposedly progressive, where we have the strongest disability rights, people with intellectual disabilities are still often segregated right from the beginning to the end of life. And this is worse, of course, for people who are sitting, who are multiply marginalized. As I've been working on this over the years, I just came to see this for various reasons more and more to be fundamentally tied to the fundamental logics of capitalism, and to work on this more and to turn towards different perspectives. And this led me back towards ultimately a Marxist perspectives and the broader Marxian tradition, Black radical tradition too, and the critical theorists and so on. I've drawn on them in this to develop an anti-capitalist and broadly Marxian analysis of neurodiversity, which I think helps get to the core of the problem, and which helps us understand perhaps also what we might do in the long run to actually make things better for neurodivergent people. Of course, rights and stuff are important, rights and recognition are important, but I don't think just having some access to reasonable accommodations or so forth is that good if so many of us are incarcerated or homeless or so forth. That's the banded approach. So it's the first anti-capitalist. I wrote the first anti-capitalist book on neurodiversity, and it offers a history of neurodivergence and neurodiversity in relation to the rise of capitalism, going right up to today, and the rise of the movement, and then an analysis of what we might do about this. Who did I write this book for? Initially, just people like myself who are neurodivergent, who are multiply marginalized, who might have, who are part of a broader working class and who have struggled with these kinds of things I've detailed. I want to help people basically link their individual problems to these much more systemic things and ultimately to capitalism itself. That's my primary audience, and there are millions of us. So that's who I'm writing for primarily. I also wrote the book for people who want to be allies, I guess, or comrades. So these could be people like family members, therapists, social workers, whoever, teachers, or just friends, to understand, gain a deeper understanding about how they can support us. And finally, I really wrote it just for people on the left who who are on the radical left, but are tempted to kind of think neurodiversity is, dismiss it as some kind of silly identity politics thing. It's not about class. It's not about, sometimes I've experienced that. And I want to show those people that actually this is a really vital part of our analysis, and that neurodivergent liberation is intimately intertwined with collective liberation. We really need to understand these together. So that's who I wrote it for. Ultimately, what I want people to take away from Empire of Normality is that the neurodiversity movement is at a crossroads. We've really gained a lot of, we've been organizing for years now, we've gained a lot of influence and we've done lots of good things. At the same time, as the movement's become more known, as our Quan concept and vocabularies have become more known, they're being increasingly co-opted by sort of neoliberal means to like find ways to profit off us and stuff like that. Get neurodivergent people into the workplace so you can extract more money from them and these kinds of things. I think we're at a crossroads. The time has come for a radical anti-capitalist politics of neurodiversity, which is much more connected with earlier radical liberation movements. So that's the main takeaway.
Well, thank you, Robert. I realize the book grapples with, much more significant issues, but the thing that I always want to help provide a bridge for understanding is to ask your thoughts on how does Empire of Normality help people create more inclusive space for neurodiversity in their lives?
Good, yeah. So I guess one of the main ways we kind of talk about, we think, or approach inclusion at the moment is doing things like, you might book someone who's like an EDI specialist, and they kind of come in and tell you at workplace or in education or so forth, how you can make things a bit better. That's helpful for some people, and sometimes it does help, but it leaves the fundamental structures of society completely intact. It doesn't really change anything at a deeper level. To really make spaces more inclusive for neurodivergent people is something we have to do together through we have to become more militant in our organizing, and it's something we have to do collectively. One of the key shifts I make in the book in our understanding is away from an idea of individual neurodivergent strengths that you can kind of say, like, we have this idea autistic people can be very logical, or dyslexic people can be very creative, and these are our individual strengths that we can use to make things better. To move away from that towards a collective notion of neurodivergent power, away from individual strengths and towards neurodivergent power. I think we need this, and to change things collectively at the kind of deeper levels of how society is organized, to really make any space properly inclusive at all. And in the final chapter, I give some more specific recommendations about how we might do that.
Well, thank you, Robert. Finally, on to our last presenter today, HLT Quan, who is the author of Become Ungovernable, an abolitionist feminist ethic for democratic living. HLT Quan is a political theorist and award-winning filmmaker. She is an associate professor of justice and social inquiry at the School of Social Transformation at the Arizona State University. Quan is the editor of the previous Pluto book, Cedric Day Robinson, On Racial Capitalism, Black Internationalism and Cultures of Resistance. HQ? Believe you're muted.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. I'm not used to being on the other side of the camera. But anyway, so in my last book, well, not the edited volume, the other book that I wrote was called Growth Against Democracy, Savage Developmentalism in the Modern World, in which I was very struck by, our economic thought and policies that drive us to, in many ways, become practically obsessed with expansionism, with violence, and with anti-democracy. And I have been very troubled by the rise of nativism and xenophobia in the United States for more than a decade. And then with the advent of the Tea Party movements and the rise of Trump, all of that become, something that you have to contend with. So there is an undeniable rise of white supremacy and the proliferation of racial hate groups and gender hate group and the normalizing of authoritarian ideas. And I really think that as an intellectual, as a community cultural worker, we have a role in helping us just making sense of what's going on. Now, with all of that, at the same time, there have been this tremendous interest in the Black freedom struggles, in movements for freedom, including the movement for prison abolition, right? Especially in light of BLM and Movement for Black Lives-led protests in the aftermath of the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others at the hand of the police and at the hand of prison guards. And so, you have these confluence of events combined with a very material consequences. For instance, in the last decade or so, especially in the United States, there has been relentless media attack combined with very well-financed legislative campaign against critical thought, against critical scholarship, especially critical race studies, critical Black studies, trans and queer studies, and cultural studies. And so these are manifestations of authoritarianism. These are manifestations of anti-democracy. And so while all of that is happening, as I said, there are movements and movement building that's going on all over the world, but also especially in the United States. And these younger generations are asking incredibly astute questions about much bigger than their immediate everyday lives issues, although they do ask those questions. Questions like, how do we move toward a more just future? How do we achieve planetary justice? What does planetary justice look like? These are incredibly heady and serious questions. They also are very astute with incredibly sophisticated understanding of theoretical language and proposing ideas that deal with complicated issues. And in many ways, as a filmmaker for more than 25 years, I've encountered ordinary people doing extraordinary things and proposing extraordinary, incredible ideas and dreams. And often those thoughts, those ideas, those speculations don't end up in academic books. They don't end up in heady books. Now, some because that's just so, some of it because maybe somehow they are deemed as too ordinary, and so therefore they're not worthy of our intellectual energy. But I think that's wrong. And so what I hope this book to do is to capture some of that, because when I looked at these movements, and particularly willful refusal project, which is what I call, and they're not just against the state, they're against capital, they're against gender, they're against organized religion. And what they are asking us to do is think about livability, think about democracy, think about justice, think about freedom in different terms. Safety and security, different term, not national state terms of order, but everyday, ordinary people terms of living. And I find that extraordinarily compelling. And so, I hope that the reader read this as a direct response to authoritarian attack on critical thought. It is a rejoinder to work against big and small tyrannies. And it showcased these stories of everyday people and community across the globe, mostly in China and the United States, I admit, in different time, different space. But when they are facing injustices and unfreedom, they have creatively resisted. They fought back, they made friendship, they have lovers, they rebuilt community, they share ideas, and they show us different ways of living. And they had really, really heady dreams. And I think that's exciting. I think that's extraordinary. And I hope that the general readership will find my work worthy of their attention. And obviously, I think this work will be great interest to activists and cultural workers, and hopefully scholars and college students as well. I'll leave it at that.
All right. Well, thank you, HQ. I really kind of see this book as like in the continuum of a series of recent feminist call to action books. I mean, specifically Angela Davis's Abolition Feminism Now. What's the connective tissue, and how do you see yourself in this particular line of inquiry?
Sure. Well, interestingly, I had just completed my first draft of the manuscript when Abolition Feminism Now was released. So Angela Davis, Gina Dent, Beth Ritchie, and Erica Miner's book. And it's an extraordinary book. The author of this book are some of the architects of the contemporary movement to end prison and for abolition democracy. And so in that way, I see my book as an important companion to Abolition Feminism Now. Not only do I extend abolition feminism as a framework, I mean, obviously I build on their individual contribution previously. I also, I think in many ways, coincidentally emphasize some of the important convergent points. But there's also a different, and that's why I see it as a companion. Whereas it focuses exclusively on the genealogy of abolition feminism, mostly in the United States, my book extends its frame as a method to look elsewhere, but also to interrogate terms like democratic elitism, terms like liberty, and justice. And then also extend abolition feminism as an ethical praxis, which they sort of touch on for democratic living. And so, yeah, I see these two books as very nice companion readings, probably along with Ruth Wilson Gilmore's Abolition Geography.
Well, thank you very much, HQ.
Thank you.
This is at the end of all of our presentations today. And I would like to thank all the authors for their time and, of course, for choosing Pluto Press to publish their books. Especially, I'd like to thank all the viewers who joined us today. You can find more information about Pluto Press, our titles and authors on our website, plutobooks.com, as well as continuing information that's available on all of our social media that you can see in the links on the YouTube page. So again, we really appreciate you joining us all today. And we look forward to creating some really important works in the future. And thank you for your support.